It was February 13th, the night before Valentine's Day, and I was alone in my apartment. My boyfriend, Mark, had been out of town for work all week, and though we'd planned to spend the holiday together, he'd called earlier that evening to tell me he wouldn't be able to make it back in time. I tried not to let it bother me. After all, it wasn't his fault, but there was something about the silence of the apartment that night that felt heavier than usual. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every creak, every rustle, every faint sound that shouldn't be there. I decided to distract myself by baking cookies. It was a silly tradition I'd started years ago, making heart-shaped sugar cookies for Valentine's Day. As I mixed the dough, I kept glancing at the clock. It was already past 10 p.m., and the wind outside was howling, rattling the windows like something was trying to get in. I tried to shake the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just the storm, but deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something was wrong. The first strange thing happened when I was rolling out the dough. I heard a faint knock at the door. It was so soft, so tentative, that I almost thought I'd imagined it. I froze, my hands hovering over the counter, and listened. The knock came again, a little louder this time. My heart started to race. Who would be knocking at this hour? Mark was out of town, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. I stood there for a moment, my breath fogging up the glass, and then I heard it again, a knock, but this time it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the window. I turned slowly, my stomach churning, and saw the curtains fluttering in the draft. The window was closed, but the knocking continued, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was tapping on the glass from the outside. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I walked over to the window, my reflection staring back at me in the dark glass. I reached out to pull the curtain aside, my hand trembling, and that's when I saw it. A face. It was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes and a wide, unnatural grin. It was pressed against the glass, staring right at me, and before I could scream, it disappeared. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, and fumbled for my phone. I called Mark, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I was about to call the police when I heard another sound, a low, guttural laugh coming from outside the window. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, frozen in terror, as the laughter grew louder and more distorted, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually the laughter stopped. The apartment was silent again, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. I locked the windows, closed the curtains, and turned on every light in the apartment. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired and stressed and letting my mind play tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next morning, Valentine's Day, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was Mark. I answered, relief flooding through me as I heard his voice.
"Hey, babe," he said. "I'm so sorry about last night."
My phone died, and I couldn't get to charger. Are you okay? I wanted to tell him about what had happened, about the face at the window and the laughter, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound crazy. Instead, I just said, "I'm fine. Just come home soon, okay?" He promised he would, and we hung up. I spent the rest of the morning trying to shake the lingering sense of dread. I told myself it was over, that whatever had happened last night was just a one-time thing. But as the day went on, I started to notice little things that made me question whether I was really alone. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as the day went on, it grew stronger. It was a sickly sweet smell, like rotting flowers, and it seemed to be coming from the kitchen. I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find the source. Then I noticed the cookies. The ones I'd baked the night before were gone. The tray was empty, except for a single cookie in the shape of a heart. It was broken in half, and written in red icing were the words, "Happy Valentine's Day." I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't written that. I hadn't even used red icing. I grabbed the tray and threw it in the trash, my hands shaking. That's when I heard the laughter again. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was there. I spun around, my eyes darting around the room, but there was no one there. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, by watching TV, by doing anything to keep my mind off what was happening. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I expected to see that face again, that pale, grinning face. But it never came. By the time Mark got home that evening, I was a nervous wreck. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I wanted to tell him everything, but I couldn't. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. So I just shook my head and said, "Nothing. I'm just glad you're home." He hugged me, and for a moment, I felt safe. But that feeling didn't last long. As we sat down to eat dinner, I noticed something strange. Mark kept glancing at the window, his eyes darting back and forth like he was watching something. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there. Just the dark glass, reflecting the light from the room. "What are you looking at?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the window, his expression blank. And then, slowly, he turned to me and smiled. It was the same smile I'd seen the night before. Wide, unnatural, and filled with something I couldn't quite place. My blood ran cold. "Mark?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't say anything. He just kept smiling, his eyes empty and unblinking. And then, in a voice that wasn't his, he said, "Happy Valentine's Day." I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is that when I woke up the next morning, Mark was gone. The apartment was empty, except for the smell of rotting flowers and the sound of faint, distant laughter. I never saw him again. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the knocking. And when I look out the window, I see that face, pale, grinning, and staring right at me. And I know, deep down, that it's not over. It's never over. Happy Valentine's Day. The story doesn't end there. A few days after Mark disappeared, I started receiving letters. They were slipped under my door, always at night, always when I was alone. The first one was just a single sheet of paper with a single sentence written in red ink. "I'm still here." The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic, and it didn't look like Mark's. I told myself it was a prank, that someone was messing with me, but the letters kept coming. Each one was more disturbing than the last. "I can see you. You'll never be alone. I'm watching." I tried to ignore them, to throw them away, but they kept appearing, no matter how many times I locked the door or checked the peephole. And then, one night, I found something else, a small, heart-shaped box, wrapped in red paper. It was sitting on my doorstep, and when I opened it, I found a single cookie inside. It was the same kind I'd baked that night, the night I saw the face at the window. And written in red icing were the words, "Eat me." I threw the box in the trash, my hands shaking, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was doing this? Why were they targeting me? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I was receiving creepy letters and cookies? They'd think I was crazy. So I kept quiet, hoping it would all just go away. But it didn't. The letters kept coming, and the knocking at the window started again. It was always the same, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. And every time I looked, there was nothing there, just the dark glass, reflecting my own terrified face. I started sleeping with the lights on, with the TV blaring, anything to drown out the silence. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. And then, one night, I saw him. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard the knock. It was louder this time, more urgent, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I got up, my heart pounding, and walked to the window. The curtains were closed, but I could see the outline of someone standing outside. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the curtain, my hand trembling. And then I pulled it back. It was Mark. He was standing there, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and empty. He was smiling that same unnatural smile, and when he saw me, he raised his hand and waved. I stumbled back, my mind racing. How is this possible? Where had he been? I wanted to open the window, to let him in, but something stopped me. Something about the way he was standing, the way he was smiling, made my skin crawl. "Mark," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer. He just kept smiling, his eyes locked on mine. And then, slowly, he raised his other hand, and it was a knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. My heart stopped. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in his gaze, as he raised the knife and brought it down against the glass. The sound was deafening, a sharp, shattering crack that echoed through the apartment. I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me, as the window exploded inward. Shards of glass rained down around me, and I felt a sharp pain in my arm as one of them sliced through my skin. I scrambled to my feet, my mind screaming at me to run, but Mark was already inside. He was standing in the middle of the room, his eyes empty, his smile wider than ever. The knife was still in his hand, its blade dripping with something dark and wet. I backed away, my heart pounding, as he took a step toward me. "Mark, please," I begged, my voice trembling. It's me. It's me." He didn't answer. He just kept coming, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was savoring every moment. I turned and ran, my legs carrying me toward the door, but it was locked. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps slow and steady, and I knew I was running out of time. And then I felt his hand on my shoulder. I screamed, thrashing against his grip, but he was too strong. He spun me around, his face inches from mine, and I could see the madness in his eyes. He raised the knife, his smile widening, and I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. Instead, I heard a voice that wasn't Mark's. It was low and guttural, filled with a malice that made my blood run cold. "Happy Valentine's Day," it said. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was alone. The apartment was silent, the window intact, as if nothing had happened. But I knew it wasn't a dream. The cuts on my arm were real, the blood still fresh. And Mark was gone. I never saw him again. The letters stopped, the knocking stopped, but I know it's not over. Because sometimes, late at night, I hear the laughter. And when I look out the window, I see that face, pale, grinning, and staring right at me. And I know, deep down, that it's not over. It's never over. Happy Valentine's Day.